You want to know what's more frightening than anything else in this world? Not darkness, not death. The most frightening thing is standing 2 feet away from the person you have trusted your entire life, looking them in the eyes, and hearing them say, calmly, without a single tremor in their voice, "She made it all up. There was no money. I have no idea what she's even talking about." My name is Savannah. I'm 31 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, and a year and a half ago, my life split clean in two, before and after. Before was when I had a brother. After was when I learned that the brother I thought I knew had never really existed. There was only a man who was very, very good at pretending. That day started like any other Tuesday. I remember sitting at my window in the morning with a cup of coffee, watching the street below. People walking down Congress Avenue with their lunch bags, someone out walking a dog, a taco truck on the corner sending up a thin curl of steam. Austin in the morning smells like warm asphalt and freshly cut grass. It's a smell I still can't confuse with anything else. I had no idea that was the last morning I would just sit and drink my coffee and not think about anything at all. My brother Connor is 6 years older than me. When I was 9 and he was 15, our father died of a heart attack behind the wheel on Highway 283. Mom was left alone with 2 kids, a mortgage, and a job at a pharmacy that barely covered the bills. Connor stepped up and took on everything he could. He got a job at the grocery store around the corner. At 16, after school and on weekends. He helped Mom with money. He taught me to ride a bike. He was the one who came into my room when I had nightmares, sat down on the edge of the bed and said, "I'm here. Everything's okay." I grew up with one simple, unshakable belief. Connor was someone you could trust 100%. No conditions. No exceptions. Just because he was my brother. And people like that, you might get 1 or 2 in a lifetime, or maybe none at all. And I had been lucky. That's exactly why, when he came to me 2 years ago with an idea, I didn't ask a single hard question. That's exactly why I gave him everything I had. And that's exactly why what happened next broke me in a way nothing else ever had. Not my father's death, not the end of a 4-year relationship, not moving to a new city where I didn't know a single soul. Being let down by a stranger is pain. Being let down by your brother is amputation. I spent that Tuesday in the Travis County Courthouse. It's an old building on Gurney Street, high ceilings, wooden benches that smell of furniture polish and dust. I sat at the plaintiff's table and stared at the back of Connor's head. His neatly trimmed hair, his white shirt. The way he sat. Straight, composed, like a man with nothing to fear. His attorney sat beside him, an older man in a gray suit with gold cufflinks. When the judge asked Connor to respond to the question about the wire transfers, my brother turned around, looked directly at me, and smiled. Barely. Just the corner of his mouth. Then he leaned toward his attorney and said it just loud enough for me to hear. "She made the whole thing up. She always had a wild imagination, even as a kid." Mom was sitting in the row behind him. When our eyes met, she looked away. Under the table, I gripped the printed bank statement so hard the paper crumpled. $200,000. $200,000. Transferred from my account to his. One payment on March 14th at 10:47 in the morning. And 8 more transfers after that. $200,000 in total. Everything I had. I stared at the back of his head and thought only one thing. How long did you plan this, Connor? Or did it just happen on its own? because I was there, and I was easy to trust. But that wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And for you to understand how I ended up in that courtroom, I need to tell you everything from the start. And it starts with the money, with where it came from in the first place. People assume that kind of money arrives all at once. One lucky break, one big moment. Mine didn't come that way. It came drop by drop, year by year. And every single drop cost something. Time, exhaustion, giving something up that I wanted. I was 22 when I got my first real job, a junior analyst position at a small logistics company in Austin. The salary wasn't much, $38,000 a year. For Texas, that's a reasonable starting point, but there's no room for anything extra. I rented a room in an apartment with 2 other women, cooked at home, skipped restaurants on weeknights, didn't buy new clothes unless I absolutely had to. I wasn't cheap. I just knew what I was saving for. Ever since my dad died, and Mom and I spent months not knowing whether we'd cover the utility bills, I made myself a promise. I will always have a cushion. Always. A reserve that no one can take away. By 25, I had around $12,000 in a savings account. Then I got a raise, up to $51,000. I moved into my own studio, but kept living the same way. By 28, I had $40,000. Then Grandma Dorothy died, Mom's mother. She lived to 83, spent her whole life teaching elementary school in San Antonio, never wasted a dollar, and left behind a small house and some savings. The house was sold, the money divided between Mom and the 2 of us. I received $65,000. I remember sitting in the notary's office, staring at that number on the document. $65,000. To me, that was an enormous amount. I thought about Grandma Dorothy, about how she had set aside a little at a time her whole life so that one day it would belong to us. I decided I wasn't going to spend it on nothing. I moved it into an investment account and barely touched it. By the time Connor came to me, I had just over $200,000. Between compound interest, years of saving, and the inheritance. 8 years to reach that number. 8 years of saying no, of discipline, of small monthly transfers into an account I tried not to look at too often. Connor came to see me in November, almost 2 years ago now. We met at a cafe on South Congress. I got a cappuccino. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, same as always. He looked good. Tan, wearing a new jacket, smiling. He said he had an idea he'd been thinking about for a while. That he'd found a partner, an old friend named Tyler, who worked in commercial real estate. That Austin's demand for warehouses and small commercial rental spaces was through the roof right now. The market was growing, everyone knew it. That he and Tyler had found a property, an old warehouse in East Austin that could be bought, renovated, and rented out to small businesses. Annual return, 12 to 15%. Payback period, 4 years. He was confident. He showed me numbers on his laptop, spreadsheets, projections, comparisons with similar properties. He had an answer for every question I asked. I asked about risks. He walked me through them. I asked about Tyler. He pulled up his LinkedIn page. I asked why he was coming to me instead of a bank. He explained. Banks require collateral. The process takes too long, and this window was narrow. Someone else could buy it first. And then he said the one thing that erased whatever doubt I had left. He said, "Savvy, you know I would never come to you with something bad. You're my sister. I remember how we lived after Dad. I would never let anything happen to your money. It's me. It's me. Those two words switched everything off. Every precaution, every instinct, every bit of common sense I had. Because it really was him. My brother. The person who used to sit on the edge of my bed when I had nightmares. I said, "Okay, let's do it." I didn't ask for a written agreement. I didn't bring in a lawyer. I didn't check the property documents. I made the transfer the very next day. $100,000, first installment. Because it was Connor. Because you don't ask your brother to sign something. That's not how family works. It was the most expensive mistake of my life, and I'm still paying for it. The warning signs came quickly. I just didn't want to hear them. There's a gap between the moment you start feeling something is wrong and the moment you finally say it out loud. That gap is the most dangerous place you can be, because that's where you start making up explanations. That's where you tell yourself, he's probably just stressed. It's probably temporary. I'm probably overreacting. For the first 3 weeks, Connor texted me almost every day. Short messages. Everything's on track. The paperwork's in progress. Tyler's handling the permits. Sometimes he'd send photos, the building from outside, the two of them standing at the entrance, some construction material in the corner. I would look at those photos and feel something warm, like I was part of something real. Then, in January, he told me he needed more money for renovations. The estimate had gone up, the contractor had raised his prices, materials had gotten more expensive. I transferred another $30,000. In February, another $25,000. In March, 18 more. Every time there was an explanation. Every time it sounded reasonable. Every time I told myself, this is fine. This is how investments work. Then April came, and Connor started disappearing. At first, he just replied more slowly. A message in the morning, an answer by evening. Then the next day. Then I called and he didn't pick up. I texted, "Con, is everything okay?" He replied 6 hours later. "Yeah, all good, just busy." I asked how the property was coming along. He wrote, "Moving forward, don't worry." I asked if he could send a photo of how the building looked now. No reply for 2 days. I remember sitting on my couch that evening, staring at my phone. It was around 10 at night. The lights of Austin were glowing outside my window. A radio was playing somewhere in my neighbor's apartment. And I caught myself thinking something I had been pushing away for weeks. What if something is wrong? I pushed it away again. I told myself, he's under stress, he has deadlines, construction is always like this. He's just busy. The thought came back 3 days later, when I had called 5 times in a row and he hadn't picked up once. I called Mom. Her name is Linda. She's 61, still living in the same house in San Antonio where we grew up. Her voice is always a little tired, but warm. She's the kind of person who handles things quietly, without making a scene. I told her, "Mom, Connor hasn't responded in several days. I'm a little worried." She paused for a second, then said, "Savvy. You know how Connor is. He gets buried in work and goes quiet. Don't make it into something. He's a grown man. Don't make it into something." That phrase would echo in my head for a long time afterward. In May, Connor resurfaced on his own, called me, cheerful, a little apologetic. Said things had been incredibly hectic, that Tyler had issues with a contractor, that they'd brought in a new crew and things were moving again now. I exhaled. I was so relieved to hear from him that I didn't ask a single hard question. I just said, "Okay, good to hear your voice." He promised to send an updated estimate and new photos. He never did. In June, I couldn't reach him for 4 days straight. On the 5th day, I wrote, "Connor, I need to understand what's happening with the money." The reply came half a day later. "Savvy, I'm busy. Stop pressuring me. You're making everything worse with your panic." Your panic. I read that message 10 times. It felt like being hit. Not hard, but precisely. Right in the place where self-doubt lives. Was I really panicking for no reason? Was I just an anxious person? Was I the problem? That's when I called my friend Emily. We've known each other since college. She works as a financial consultant in Dallas. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, very softly, "Savvy, when was the last time you saw an actual legal document confirming this property exists?" I opened my mouth and couldn't answer, because I had never seen one. That was the moment I stopped making up explanations. But the worst was still ahead, because when I tried to talk to my family took his side. Have you ever gone looking for help and found that the people who were supposed to give it had already chosen the other side? It's a particular kind of feeling, like walking down a familiar road and suddenly discovering the road is gone and there's nothing under your feet but air. I decided to get the family together. It seemed like the right thing to do. Not go straight to the police, not call a lawyer, but talk like people first. Sit down, lay out the facts, work through it together. I believed that if everyone just heard the same thing at the same time, it would all become clear. I called Mom and asked her to come to Austin, or at least be on a video call. I called Aunt Betty, Mom's sister, someone I'd always been close to. I asked Connor to be on the call too. I said, "I need all of us to talk about the situation with the money." Connor said, "Sure." No hesitation, no questions. I thought maybe he actually wanted to clear things up. Maybe he'd explain, and it would turn out I really had been panicking over nothing. The call was on a Saturday evening. Mom was in her kitchen in San Antonio. I could see that same blue tile behind her that I've known since I was a child. Aunt Betty was in Houston, sitting in an armchair in her living room. Connor was in his apartment, a bare white wall behind him. I started calmly. I said, "I want to talk about the money I transferred to Connor. Just over $200,000 in total, from last November through this March. In that time, I have not received a single official document. No loan agreement, no confirmation of how the funds were used. Connor has been largely unreachable for months. I want to understand what's going on." Silence. Then Connor spoke, quietly, with the exhausted tone of someone who has grown tired of explaining the obvious. "Savvy, I told you. Things are moving. Construction takes time. You can't just pressure someone like this and demand weekly reports. That's not how it works." Mom jumped in immediately. "Savvy, why are you turning this into a whole production? Connor is working. He's under stress. You can see that." I said, "Mom, I put in all my savings. $200,000. I don't have a single document. I have the right to know what's happening." Aunt Betty shook her head. "Savvy, sweetheart, you've always been like this. Remember how you cried before that 8th grade exam and then aced it? This is the same thing. Connor is your brother. He would never cheat you." I felt something tighten in my chest. I said, "This isn't anxiety. These are real dollars and real facts. I made the transfers. I have no paperwork. I can't get anyone on the phone. This isn't panic. These are questions. Connor looked straight into the camera then and spoke slowly, drawing out every word. I can't believe you're doing this. You know how hard I'm working. You know how much I put into this project. And instead of support, you're running an interrogation in front of Mom and Aunt Betty. That hurts, Savvy. It really does. Mom, immediately. Savvy, look at what you're doing to your brother. I sat in silence for a few seconds, because in that moment, something very quiet and very precise clicked inside me. I had come to talk about money, and somehow the conversation had become about what I was doing to my brother. I had come with facts and been answered with 8th grade and anxiety. I had expected support and been asked to be quiet. I said exactly one thing. Okay, I understand. And I closed my laptop. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and thought. I went over every word, every inflection, every pause. And I understood. What had happened on that call was not an accident. It was a pattern. It was a system. Connor had known what Mom would say. He had known what Aunt Betty would say. He didn't come to that call to explain anything. He came to win. And he had. The next day, Mom called me. She said, Savvy, please don't tear this family apart. We've worked so hard to keep it together since your dad. You know what family means. I knew. I knew too well. That was exactly why it hurt so much. But the worst was still to come. Because Connor wasn't just avoiding the truth, he was rewriting it. There is a way to destroy a person without ever laying a hand on them. You simply convince them they can no longer trust their own memory. That they're confused, that they've always been a little like this, a little unsteady, a little prone to exaggeration. If you do it long enough and confidently enough, the person starts to believe it. About 2 weeks after that Saturday call, I started noticing something strange. People we both knew began acting slightly differently around me. Not unkindly, just carefully. As though they knew something I didn't. The first was Christina, a mutual friend. The three of us had grown up in the same neighborhood in San Antonio. We ran into each other at a coffee shop on South Lamar. She'd come in for a coffee to go. I was sitting there with my laptop. She said hello, a little stiffly. I asked how she was. Fine, she said. Then, already on her way out, she turned back and said it very quietly, almost awkwardly. Savvy, are you doing okay? Connor mentioned you're going through a hard time, that you've been really exhausted and kind of not yourself. Not yourself. I looked at her, and for a few seconds, I genuinely didn't know what to say. Then there was Derek, a friend of Connor's from high school, someone I used to see at occasional get-togethers. He sent me a message on Instagram, short, friendly. Hey, heard you're kinda stressed about some confusion over money. For what it's worth, Connor's really worried about you. He says you're not remembering things the way they happened. Not remembering things the way they happened. I saved that message. Then I started saving everything else, every hint, every offhand remark, and gradually, the picture came into focus. Connor had been working, methodically, quietly, ahead of schedule, telling his version to everyone around him. Not loudly, not dramatically, just casually, in conversation. My sister's a little confused. She's under a lot of stress. She tends to blow things out of proportion. There's really no actual problem here. This is called gaslighting. I learned the word later, from a therapist I started seeing in the fall. But back then, in July, I was only feeling its effects. I started doubting myself, genuinely and deeply. I'd wake up at night and think, what if I got something wrong? What if I'm misremembering the terms? What if it wasn't a loan? What if it was an investment, and he has no obligation to pay anything back? What if I really am just an anxious person who's turned nothing into a crisis? There was one evening when I caught myself reading through my old messages with Connor for what felt like the 100th time, looking for the exact moment I might have misunderstood something, looking for where he might have meant one thing while I decided he meant another. It was like pressing your tongue against a sore tooth, over and over, knowing it's going to hurt, unable to stop. And then, on one completely ordinary evening, I found what I needed. Not what I had been afraid of finding, what I actually needed. I was scrolling through old messages looking for something else entirely when I came across a voice message from Connor, sent back in December. I didn't even remember it. I hit play and heard his voice, clear and steady. "Savvy, thanks for the transfer. Got the 100,000. It all came through. This is the loan, like we agreed. I'll pay you back as soon as the property starts turning a profit. You're the best." The loan, like we agreed. His words, his voice, December. I played it again, and again. Then I took a screenshot, saved the file to the cloud, forwarded it to my email. My hands were trembling a little, not from fear, but from that particular feeling you get when you've been walking in the dark for a long time and someone finally turns on the light. I hadn't made it up. I hadn't gotten confused. I hadn't exaggerated. It was a loan. He had said so himself. And now I had proof. That night, for the first time in months, I slept through to morning. And when I woke up, I opened my laptop and started looking for an attorney. But collecting evidence is one thing. Learning how to use it is something else entirely. And that story was only just beginning. The attorney looks at me and says, "Without a written loan agreement, this is going to be very difficult." I look at him and say, "I have something better than a piece of paper. I have his voice." Marcus Webb's office was on Lavaca Street, in an old brick building where the elevator worked about half the time and the hallways smelled of strong coffee and paper folders. I found him through the State Bar of Texas website. 5 stars, civil litigation specialty, reviews mostly from people who had sued contractors and former business partners. Nothing about family disputes. But I decided that was exactly what I needed. Someone who knew how to work with facts, not feelings. I showed up for the appointment at the end of July with a folder containing everything I had managed to collect. Printed bank statements showing every transfer, screenshots of our text message and WhatsApp conversations, a printout of Tyler's LinkedIn page, which, it turned out, had been deleted about a month after I sent the last wire, and most importantly, Connor's voice message from December, copied onto a flash drive and forwarded to 3 different email accounts. Marcus listened to me in silence for about 20 minutes. Then he picked up a pen and started making notes in his legal pad. Then he said, "So there's no promissory note, no written agreement, no witnesses present when the money changed hands." I said, "That's right." He said, "But there are bank statements confirming the transfers to his account. There's a text conversation where he directly references the project and the money. And there's a voice message in which he himself calls the funds a loan and confirms receipt." I said, "Exactly." He was quiet for a few more seconds and then said, "This is not as thin as you might think. This is actually workable. those were the first words in several months that made something ease inside me. We spent nearly 2 hours in his office. Marcus walked me through how civil litigation works in Texas, what counts as admissible evidence, what my odds were, and where the risks lay. He was direct about all of it, that this would be a long road, that Connor would most likely deny everything to the end, that the case could drag on for a year or more. But he also said, "You have that voice message, and it carries real weight. Texas courts admit audio recordings as evidence provided the recording wasn't obtained by deception. You didn't secretly record him. He sent that message to you himself. That's the key distinction." I nodded and wrote everything down. Then I asked, what else could help? Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, "A witness. Someone who was either present during the conversation about the loan or who can corroborate your account." I thought of Emily. She hadn't been there for the original conversation, but she had been there from the very beginning when I started getting worried. She knew the details. Marcus said, "Talk to her. If she's willing to testify, that matters." But then, something else happened. About a week after my meeting with Marcus, Derek reached out. The same Derek who had previously passed along Connor's message that I was misremembering things. This time, his message was different. He wrote, "Savvy, there's something I need to tell you. I've been thinking about this for a while and wasn't sure whether to say anything, but it's not right. Last month, Connor was bragging in front of me and a few other guys about buying a new motorcycle and putting down a deposit on a lake house rental. I asked him where the money came from. He said, 'My sister invested, so now it's my capital.' I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I do now. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." I read that message 3 times. Then I took a screenshot. Then I called Marcus. He said, "Save everything. Ask Derek to put it in writing, even just in that same message thread, and ask whether he'd be willing to testify." Derek agreed. Not right away. He asked for a few days to think it over, but he agreed. He sent me a long message laying out everything he had heard in careful detail, including the date and the names of the other people who had been present for that conversation. I printed it out and slipped it into the folder alongside the bank statements and the voice message. The folder kept getting thicker. Connor had no idea I was building any of this. He still thought I was broken, that I was too tangled up in my own doubt to act, that the family was on his side, and there would never be a lawsuit. He thought he had already won, back in June, when he told me I was panicking. He was wrong. But it would be a while before he understood just how wrong. I gave him one final chance. I laid everything out honestly and offered him a way out. He responded with a threat. Marcus advised me to do this before filing the lawsuit. Not because he thought Connor would agree, but because an attempt at a settlement looks good from a legal standpoint. If the case made it in front of a judge, it would show that I had tried to resolve things like a reasonable person, that I wasn't looking for a fight, that I just wanted my money back. I wrote to Connor in early August. Not from my phone, from my email account, so there would be a record. I spent almost the entire evening on that message. I read it back, cut things out, added things back in. I needed it to sound neither desperate nor aggressive. I needed it to sound precise. I wrote, "Connor, I'm reaching out to you one last time before I file a formal lawsuit. In total, I transferred $203,400 to you between last November and this March. I have bank confirmations of every transaction, our message history, and a voice message in which you refer to these funds as a loan. I am not asking for anything beyond what you took. I am offering a payment plan. We can work out whatever timeline is genuinely realistic for you. All I need is a formal acknowledgement of the debt and a written repayment schedule. If you're willing to do that, there will be no lawsuit. If not, I'm filing within 2 weeks. I sent the email and closed my laptop, then opened it again a minute later to make sure it had gone through. It had. Then I tried to watch television. I couldn't. I went to bed at 10 and lay awake until 2 in the morning. The reply came the next day, around noon. Connor kept it short, no more than 6 lines. The gist was, he owed me nothing, there had been no loan, all of this was my interpretation of events and not one he shared. And at the end, one sentence I still remember word for word. If you decide to take this to court, Savvy, you'll regret it. It will destroy the family. And your reputation won't come out of this the way you think it will. Your reputation won't come out of this the way you think it will. I read it and felt something unexpected. Not fear, not anger. Something closer to clarity. Like the last remaining haze had suddenly lifted. He had just threatened me. Plainly, in writing, to my email address. A person with nothing to hide doesn't write that. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a short note. He's threatening me. Marcus replied within 20 minutes. Perfect. Save it. We'll use it. That same evening, Mom called. She hadn't been calling often lately, once a week at most, and the conversations were short and careful. But this time, her voice was different. Quiet. Almost pleading. She said, "Savvy, please, don't do this. You don't understand what it means for this family. Your father wouldn't have wanted this. Your father wouldn't have wanted this." She said it, and something tightened in my chest. Not from guilt, but from a different kind of pain entirely. Because I knew. My father would almost certainly have been the first one to demand that Connor pay the money back. My father was an honest man. He was the one who taught both of us that your word means something. I said, "Mom, I love you, but I'm filing." She didn't say anything. She just hung up. The next day, Aunt Betty sent a message. No warning, straight into my inbox. "Savvy, you're tearing apart everything your father built. I hope you understand what you're doing." I didn't respond. 2 days later, Marcus filed the lawsuit in Travis County District Court. The case number was a long string of digits I had memorized faster than my own zip code. There was no going back. And honestly, I didn't want to go back. Connor walked into the courtroom smiling, like a man who was certain he was going to win. I watched that smile and thought only one thing. We'll see. The first hearing was in October. I remember arriving on Gurney Street 40 minutes early just to sit on a bench outside and collect myself. Austin in October is warm air with a touch of cool in it, patches of yellow on the trees lining the street, the smell of coffee from the cafe across the road. I sat there watching people go in and out of the courthouse and thought about how every single one of them was carrying their own story, their own particular pain, their own folder of documents. Connor arrived in a gray suit alongside his attorney, Clinton Farrow, a partner at a small but well-regarded Austin firm. I had done my research beforehand. He specialized in civil disputes and had a reputation for handling what people in his field called nuanced cases, which meant cases with limited paperwork and a lot of competing accounts. That was exactly how Pharaoh structured the defense from the very first moment. In the opening hearing, he spoke briefly and with complete confidence. No written agreement had ever existed between the parties. There had been no loan. The plaintiff had voluntarily transferred funds to the defendant as part of a joint investment venture she later chose to abandon, thereby creating losses for him. The claims were based on a misreading of informal verbal conversations. The lawsuit should be dismissed. Then Marcus took the floor. He spoke slowly and methodically, without a single unnecessary gesture. He introduced the bank statements. He introduced the message records. He introduced the voice message, asking the judge's permission to play it in the courtroom. Judge Hong, a composed woman with a short haircut and the eyes of someone who had seen everything, granted it. Connor's voice came through clearly in that room. "Savvy, thanks for the transfer." "Got the 100,000, everything came through. This is the loan, like we agreed. I'll pay you back as soon as the property starts turning a profit. You're the best." I didn't look at Connor in that moment. I looked at Judge Hong. She said nothing. She simply made a note on the papers in front of her. Pharaoh moved to discredit the recording, argued that the context was unclear, that the word loan may have been used informally without legal intent, that it did not constitute a binding acknowledgement. Judge Hong listened, nodded, and said, "Your arguments are noted. I am requesting complete bank statements from both parties covering the period from November through April." That was the first serious blow to Connor's defense, because bank statements aren't interpretation, they're numbers. 6 weeks passed between the first and second hearings. 6 weeks during which I kept going to work, answering emails, cooking dinner, maintaining the appearance of normal. In the evenings, I reviewed case materials with Marcus over video call. We mapped out every possible scenario. At the second hearing, Pharaoh tried a different angle. He called Connor to the stand. And Connor, calm, assured, wearing that same smile, stated under oath, "Savannah has always been an emotionally unstable person. She tends toward exaggeration. The money she transferred was her voluntary investment in a joint venture she subsequently walked away from, causing financial harm to him in the process." I sat at the plaintiff's table and heard the words emotionally unstable. And for the first time throughout all of this, I felt not doubt. I felt anger. Clean, cold, entirely useful anger. Marcus rose for cross-examination. He asked Connor, "You are stating that the money was an investment, not a loan?" Connor said, "Yes." Marcus asked, "Then how do you explain the voice message in which you use precisely the word loan?" Connor said, "I used that word casually, without legal meaning." Marcus asked, "And the new motorcycle and the lake house deposit, were those also part of the investment project?" Pharaoh immediately objected. Judge Hong looked at him, then at Marcus, then said, "Objection overruled. Please continue." Connor lost his smile for exactly 1 second. Just 1 second. But I saw it. The judge ruled in my favor. I walked out of the courtroom and sat down on the courthouse steps and cried. Not from happiness. From something I still don't have the exact word for. The final hearing was in January, 3 months after the first. Judge Hong had reviewed everything. Bank statements from both parties, printed message records, the voice message, testimony from Derek and Emily, testimony from Connor himself. She read through the documents for longer than you'd expect from someone with a full docket. Then she looked up. She said, "The court finds as follows. The totality of the evidence presented, including the nature and regularity of the transfers, the content of the parties' correspondence, and in particular the defendant's voice message from December, clearly and convincingly establishes that the funds in question constituted a loan and not a voluntary investment. The defendant is ordered to repay the plaintiff the sum of $203,400 plus court costs within 90 days. $203,400. I stared at a fixed point on the wall and heard that number and couldn't understand what I was feeling. Marcus touched my arm. "Savannah, you won." I nodded. Then I stood up. Then I walked out. Outside the courthouse, the January air was cold and the winter sun was pale and thin. I sat down on the top step and cried. Not because anything felt wrong, because nothing felt as right as I had expected it to. I had been waiting for this ruling for months. I had imagined that when it came, something would click into place, something would settle, something would finally be over. But sitting on those steps, I understood. Nothing was over. One part had ended, and another had begun. And the part that had ended was the one that hurt the most. Because on the very same day that Judge Hong read her decision, Connor walked out of the courtroom without a single glance in my direction, without a single word, and got into Pharaoh's car. Mom hadn't come to the final hearing. She called me that evening, briefly. She said, "Congratulations." Then she hung up. There was no warmth in those two words, no relief, only exhaustion. Aunt Betty didn't reach out at all. Within 2 weeks, Connor filed an appeal. Marcus was honest with me. The appeal would most likely change nothing. The evidentiary record was too strong. But it would add several more months. I said, "Fine, I'll wait." The appeal was denied 4 months later. The first partial payment appeared in my account in May. $20,000 under a court enforcement order. Connor didn't call, didn't write. The money simply appeared as though it had been sent by a stranger. Maybe it had been, because the person I had trusted, the brother who used to sit on the edge of my bed when I had nightmares, that person no longer existed. Maybe he never really had. Maybe I had loved a version of him that I had drawn up myself, and it had always been more my creation than his reality. That's a painful thing to accept. But accepting it is the only way forward. Winning in court is not healing. It's simply justice. And justice and healing are not the same thing. One does not substitute for the other. I'm 31 years old now. The money is coming back, slowly, in installments, through a court enforcement order. I no longer have a brother. Mom and I talk once every 2 weeks. Briefly, carefully. Like two people crossing ice they know is thin. And for the first time in a very long while, I'm not afraid to wake up in the morning. I still live in the same studio in Austin. I didn't move. I love this place. I love the window that shows a patch of sky and the tops of the trees. I love the smell of coffee I make in the mornings before it's even light outside. I love the fact that here, no one is required to explain themselves to me, and I'm not required to prove anything to anyone. On Thursdays, I see a therapist. Her name is Rachel. She has a small office on Duval Street with a large fiddle-leaf fig in the corner and very soft light. She doesn't tell me what I should be feeling. She asks questions and stays quiet long enough for me to find the answers on my own. After 31 years of being told I was feeling everything wrong, that is worth more than I can put into words. Rachel and I have talked a lot about what it means to trust, about how trust works inside a family, especially a family that has been through loss. When a father dies, everyone left behind, the mother, the siblings, the children, starts holding on to each other harder than they need to. Not out of love, exactly. Out of fear. And out of that fear comes a rule. Family doesn't betray you. Family is not questioned. Family holds together no matter what. That rule made me vulnerable, because I believed in it so completely that I stopped asking questions. And Connor knew that. Emily is still one of my closest friends. After the trial, she called me and said only, "I'm glad you didn't give up." I told her, "I'm glad you asked me that question about the documents." She laughed and said, "I was so scared you'd be angry with me." I said, "You were the only person who was honest with me throughout all of this. That doesn't make me angry. That saves a person." Marcus sent me a handwritten card after the appeal was denied. Short, a few lines. It read, "Some cases aren't taken to be won. They're taken because there's no other way to live with yourself." This was one of those cases. I put it on my refrigerator, where it still is. Derek messaged me last month, just to check in. We trade messages occasionally now. He mentioned he hadn't spoken to Connor in a long time. I didn't ask why. Now, what this experience taught me. Not because I want to deliver a lesson, but because if even one person listening to this right now recognizes something of themselves in this story, I want them to hear it. The words, "but it's family," are not an argument. Family does not exempt a person from accountability. Love and integrity are not the same thing. You can love someone and still hold them to their obligations. You can trust someone and still put the agreement in writing. That is not distrust. That is respect. For yourself and for them. Money with no paperwork is a gift, even if that wasn't your intention. Even if it's your brother. Even if it's your mother. Even if it's your best friend. No document means no debt. A court may be able to help if other evidence exists, but it's far better not to end up in court at all. Gaslighting is not just a word people use on the internet. It is a real tool that real people use, consciously or not, to avoid being held responsible for what they've done. If you find yourself doubting your own memory after a conversation with someone close to you, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means someone is doing something to you that they should not be doing. And one last thing. Winning in court mattered, but something else mattered more. What mattered more was the morning I woke up after the appeal was denied and understood. I do not need anyone's permission to know the truth of what happened to me. I don't need Mom to admit it. I don't need Connor to apologize. I don't need their versions of my life. I have my own. My name is Savannah. I'm 31 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. On Thursdays, I see my therapist. In the mornings, I make coffee and look out the window at the treetops. I lost $200,000 and a brother who, as it turned out, I never really had. And I'm okay. If this story stirred something in you, anger, relief, recognition, write it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're in a situation like this right now, please don't stay silent. Not because silence is weakness, but because the truth that no one hears tears you apart from the inside. And the truth you finally say out loud starts to put you back together. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Like if this story touched you. Subscribe if you want to hear more.